Thank you for joining us on the Latter-day Stories podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Ashworth, and we are excited to bring you another episode where we are talking about the transgender topic. Probably one of the most unrepresented topics in the LGBT community, in my opinion, because we just don't know much about it. And so today's episode is really exciting because we have the opportunity to discuss individual experiences. And from my experience working with the LGBT community, it's important to share individual stories, personal experiences to help us better understand certain topics. The Latter-day Stories podcast is made possible through generous donors, through viewers and listeners just like you. If you want to support the mission of the Latter-day Stories podcast and want to help us build bigger and stronger bridges between the LDS and LGBT community, we invite you to make a donation to the podcast. There are two simple and easy ways of donating. First, by logging onto our website at latterdaystories.org and clicking on the donate tab, or you can Venmo. Send us a Venmo donation at Latter-day Stories. Really quick and easy, and I promise you, your donations will help us to build bigger and better, stronger bridges that allow us to share this message to the communities and people that desperately need it. With that aside, we want to welcome to the podcast Valerie Green.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
St. Louis, Missouri.
St. Louis, Missouri. Yes.
Beautiful, wonderful, and home.
For now, since I've lived in Missouri since 1979, I think, when my parents moved us up there from Texas.
Oh, that's a big change.
Yeah, I grew up in Lubbock, Texas, mostly. Yeah.
All right. I'm really excited for your story.
Okay.
You've got an interesting story about overcoming a lot of the odds and bucking the normal, and defying the stereotypes in search of authenticity and honesty. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I want to focus on the podcast episode today.
Okay.
So again, thank you for giving us a few minutes of your time and sharing your story.
You're welcome.
Where do we begin? What was child life like? Tell us a little bit about your world growing up.
So I was raised by a single mother of two young boys. And actually she joined the church because missionaries showed up at her door. And she'd been praying for what her boys should be like. And these two young missionaries showed up at her door just after she'd done that. And she was like, I want them to be like that. And that brought her into the church. For me as a child, I knew when I was 4 that I was different in some way. Now, maybe I didn't have access to a father's clothes to dress in, but I had access to a mother's, and I did that as much as I could.
So you knew you were different because you just wanted to dress up?
I wanted to dress up, and I wanted to be like the girls. I wanted to be like my aunts. I just identified with them. I didn't have a lot of male influences, and I've often wondered if that lack of male influences was a factor. I have no idea, and I really don't think that it was. It just meant that I had opportunities to explore things that I might not have otherwise been able to explore. But I would run around in the laundromat in my mother's long gaucho. It was like great to be in that. I was born in 64, so this was the late 60s, early 70s. My mother wore wigs because she didn't like to do her hair all the time, so I had access to wigs. I had access to her boots, the 70s styles. And so it was just an opportunity to do things that it just made me comfortable. I had no idea why. I didn't know what was going on, but I just knew that was fun. At some point, she purchased Skousens, So You Want to Raise a Boy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and which I think was as a result of what she was seeing in me, but she didn't understand what to do. I know she had it because I saw it, and she actually had me read passages out of it at some point. And many conversations where she sat me down. My brother would catch me wearing her corset under my clothes. We'd be playing a family game, and he'd reach over and tap my back, and he'd feel it, and he'd say, Mom, Virgil, who was my original name, Virgil's wearing the thing again. That's another way of talking to. You don't need to do that. You need to stop doing those things. And so she had signs, but she had no idea what it was either. She just knew I wasn't acting like she thought a boy should be acting. So that went on through years, and I got involved in tennis. And through tennis, I was one day reading and discovered Dr. Renee Richards.
Ah, yes.
This was, sometimes I tell it's 10 o'clock, sometimes I say it was 10 years old, sometimes 12 years old. It was around that time, but that was the first time I said, I was surprised that you could change, and it just hit me. But I knew that I couldn't. I know my mom had talked to me about not doing those things. And this was not something that I suspected would ever be accepted by people. I was the brainiac of the class and the nerd, and which was not an easy thing to do. You get picked on for doing those things, and you're picked on until they need you to help you in the math competition. So I wasn't going to let anybody know what was going on, so I just put it aside. And but it didn't really affect me terribly. I've always found myself, I've said I'm too rational to be depressed sometimes. So I have just been so lucky that I've never dealt with severe depression over this. I've never had suicidal ideation. None of those things have affected me. I've been able to just suppress it and hold it back for as long as I needed to. So through adolescence and through high school, at some point somebody thought that I was gay, and I'm like, no, I'm not, but they didn't know what it was. Interesting things would happen that I would find ways to be involved with the girls. I would go play with jacks with the girls in grade school rather than go and play on recess with the boys. I did everything I could to be with the girls. And we had some interesting things in high school. I had to play God. That helps my ego. So I had to play God in a play called Everyman. It was a reader's theater, and they wanted us in costume, even though we just sat and read from scripts. And so they wanted God to appear all white, and I was like, my mother has a white pantsuit.
Robes, long hair. I mean, this was right up your alley.
It wasn't that. It was just a white pantsuit,
Oh, gotcha.
But it was female. So I'm like, oh, if I have to, I'll do that. And so I did. So I was on stage in women's clothing, and it was great. I was ecstatic. Nobody knew about it. Nobody knew why. I had other things like driving down the road one time, and my lips were really chapped, and my mother and my aunt were in the car. I was like, do you have any chapstick? No, we don't. And I'm like, well, it really hurts. And my aunt goes, well, all I've got is this lipstick. And I said, well, if that's all we've got, that's what I'll have to use. So I did. And on one of these road trips in Texas, we'd stop at the roadside cafe, roadside things, and have picnics like you don't do anymore. And I remember one time my mother sending me to throw some trash away, and I'm walking along, and I hear in the background, I just go, he walks like a little girl. And I was like, yes, I do.
I'm winning.
Oh, yeah. Younger things, we would play in the neighborhood. We would all get together and play superheroes. So my best friend, whose name was the same as my brother's, so we just called him Cowboy. He would always pick Superman, and someone would pick Batman, and I would just wait until they were all done. And then I would go, I guess all that's left is Supergirl. So I would pretend to be Supergirl that afternoon. So there's little things throughout my life. There were always just clues that I found little ways to do things. And then I've actually written some blog posts about cheerleading, because when I was a varsity cheerleader in high school. So varsity team was me and 9 girls, and it was fantastic. And I've written some stuff about what they taught me about acceptance and trust and teams and camaraderie, which was really good stuff. But what they didn't know, I didn't even really know it, was that was me being integrated into a female group. The closest I ever got to being a girl when I was a kid.
And so these experiences lead me to believe that you were generally supported quite well, which would explain why, as you opened the podcast interview, there weren't heavy feelings of depression.
No, there weren't. I found ways to do things, and I got accepted into places that probably wouldn't normally be accepted. The cheerleading was interesting because they defended me. People would say things, and they were like, no, what are you doing for the school? And
this was in Texas?
This was in Pleasant Hill, Missouri. This was after we moved. We moved up to Missouri in the middle of my freshman year of high school, in a very small city called Pleasant Hill, and of like maybe a few thousand people. And it was country boys and stuff, and this was not a place where you wanted to be. I don't know anybody who identified as LGBTQ of any sort at the school, except we all knew the choir director was gay. We were fairly certain. We never actually knew. We were fairly certain that was the case.
Similar situation in my school.
Yes, yeah.
And then later, after the teacher retired, then finally came out.
Yeah.
And that's...
I think that may have happened. I didn't pay a lot of attention. I wasn't really getting back. High school wasn't a pleasant experience. I was in band. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the science and stuff. But they didn't have a tennis team, and I was really disappointing by that. So my best friend and I played tennis whenever we could. But the cheerleading was that was like the culmination in that senior year of having an opportunity to be with the girls, and I was just another team member, and it was fantastic. So.
Let's talk a little bit about church and church experiences.
Okay, I don't recall anything as a youth that was specific about church experiences, other than a couple of really hard-nosed home teachers who insisted that you have to go home teaching rather than going to your thing for school. My mother had to put a stop to that. So there weren't a lot of church issues, other than maybe I would see something and I would think about it, but I never had any experiences that were unusual. The church experiences were much, much later. And it was actually, some of that was what made me question the church. It's like, well, if this is all true, then how can I be this way? And how can I be doing the things that they ask me to do? And one of the culminations of that was when I was called to be the stake president. And this was after I had actually informed my wife and my therapist, and we can get to that story in a little bit. But I was called to be an elders quorum president. And I was talking to my therapist about it, and of course she knew all about this at this point. And I said, if anything tells me the church is not true, it's the fact that they're calling me to be elders quorum president. And she looked at me and she said, maybe it just doesn't matter. Maybe it's not the issue that you think it is. So I flipped my thinking around. And at that point, my wife and I had been bargaining how we're going to do this. Because at that point, I'd come out to her and my therapist as a cross-dresser. We were debating what I could do and what I couldn't do. And so we'd come up with some plans, and we'd come up with, if and when we would tell the kids, and what I could do out in public, and what she would participate in. And so we'd made those decisions. And I decided at that point that I would never discuss it with a church leader unless I was called to a position that I thought was highly visible enough so that them letting me go would embarrass them and embarrass me and that kind of thing. So I decided that if I was ever called to anything bishop, high council, or anything above that, I would tell them that I could only take the calling if they were prepared to either accept rumors that they've heard about me, being at the time a cross-dresser. I didn't have the term transgender really at that point, or I couldn't take the calling. So elders quorum was not it, and so I'd made this decision about how and when I would come out to a church leader. We'd made a decision about what the boundaries would be between intermarriage and when we would tell the kids. And I had decided that I wouldn't do anything beyond cross-dressing until much later in life. The kids were grown, and possibly my wife and I might not be together, although we had no plans to separate or do anything like that. And then they called me to be elders quorum president, and so I accepted. And I went into that meeting to be set apart. And there's always the beloved stake president. This is the stake president that everyone's loved, and he's just kindest, and etc. He's setting me apart. And I walk into that meeting and I think, this is going to be the time when he puts his hands on someone's heads and he just stops and he goes, I can't set this person apart. I just knew that was going to happen. Instead, the first words out of his mouth were, you've made the correct decisions for yourself and your family. And God loves you.
So you had discussed this with your wife.
Yes.
You had come out
to my wife and my therapist.
Yeah, and so this was a personal decision.
Yes.
And now just confirmed by a blessing.
I felt so much peace when that happened. And that was the moment that I knew I was fine. And at that point, it was just now boundaries with my wife, working with my family and kids as necessary. All the other terrible questions of your employment and society and those things. But at that point, I decided I was good with God. And I never questioned that ever again. No.
So fascinating.
Thanks.
I mean, that is, if we always, especially within Mormonism, talk about the importance of listening to the promptings of the Spirit. And that was the clarion call.
That is exactly how I felt about it. I could not believe what I was hearing when he said that. And I have no idea what he was thinking. You know, it may have just been his standards. I don't know. But it spoke to me so powerfully.
But for you, that was the message you needed to hear.
It was.
How long did you serve as Elders Quorum president?
I served as Elders Quorum president maybe 3 years, not as long as normal. I mentioned that my wife and I may have not in therapy, and she had some mental health issues. And there were just a lot of things going on, and I went and talked to my bishop one day, and I said, I can't do this anymore. I've got these issues at home. And in fact, when my wife first found out that I was a cross-dresser, she actually got better for a while, because as the therapist said, for now, I was sick instead of her. So she was enjoying the fact that I was the sick one and had a problem to deal with, which I knew I didn't actually have a problem. And the therapist said, yeah, I know you don't, but this is what she believes. It was actually a kind of a nice period of time. But because of some other issues that were going on within the marriage and dealing with family life, I just went and talked to the bishop, and I said, here's where things are. This is why I don't think I can be effective. And they released me. So
I want to jump back just a little bit.
Okay.
Not back into your story, but back into the point where we've discussed a little about cross-dressing.
Yes.
The difference between cross-dressing and being transgender. So many who listen to this podcast are unaware, or there's a lack of education in understanding the difference between those two topics.
Sure.
Can you break those down for us? Explain what the difference is between cross-dressing and what it is to be transgender.
Yeah. So there's some semi-formal definitions, and I'm not going to tell you I remember what they are, but cross-dressing I generally consider to be someone who prefers to wear women's clothing and to appear as a female, but only on occasion, but is still perfectly okay with himself as a man in a male role. And so it's an outlet. For some, it's fetishistic. For others, it's just an expression of how they feel inside. For some, it's sexual. For me, it was never sexual. It wasn't fetishistic. It was an expression of myself. And for me, it was a compromise. But a transgender is a person who knows that this isn't an expression of part of them. This is the expression of who they really are. And that's the way I've always addressed that, is who I really am as this transgender woman. I didn't always understand that. Once I was able to sit and explore that, and get past the, okay, I'm a cross-dresser, and I have to tell my wife, and well, what about the kids, and how are people going to react? That was as far out as I was able to come at that point. And I really can't remember if I talked to the therapist about it being something else and drawing that boundary, or if I just made that decision myself. That was in 1997, so it's been a little bit fuzzy for that part.
What are some things you wish the community knew about this topic?
About transgender?
Yeah, especially maybe even just in the initial stages of the coming out, the understanding, the acceptance stage.
The initial stages are almost always fear. Denial, fear. First of all, it's like, I'm a freak, apparently. You hear society is against this. You go to church and you're definitely taught that you don't do anything different from someone else. And so it's fear of loss. That was, for me, when I was addressing it, it was fear of loss. I was afraid of losing my job. I had 5 children. I had a wife. I did not want to lose my livelihood. My wife was desperately concerned about how she would be perceived by being married to a crossdresser. That's part of the reason why we didn't tell anybody. But it's mostly fear for me. I know too many other people where it is self-loathing and self-hatred. I have a person I've kind of adopted who lives in Perth, Australia. I only converse with her online. She's a beautiful woman. She went to ask about facial surgery, and the doctor said, I can't do anything for you. She's an absolutely beautiful woman, but these are things that she's actually posted publicly. She hates herself. She thinks she should not be allowing herself to live. And she harms herself, which she's getting better at. But I know other people who just, for them, it's not fear, it's a self-loathing, it's I shouldn't exist. There's something so deeply wrong with me that please someone help me. Now, from my perspective, I just always wished it would go away. But I wasn't going to seek help. I just assumed that, this will go away when I get a girlfriend. Or it'll go away the first time I kiss a girl. Or it'll go away when I get married. Or when I have my first kid. Or when I have my second kid. Or on and on and on. And it doesn't go away. It just builds and it just gets stronger. And so, again, for me, fear of loss. For so many others, fear of loss of their existence. And that's what I think is the worst part. And that's what I want to help other people get past. We're all going to deal with fear at some point of some type. But the feeling of loneliness, the feeling of worthlessness, the feeling of not being lovable, those things have got to go away. I have changed drastically since I transitioned. I started hormone replacement therapy in August of last year. And it's been fairly effective, but my whole demeanor has changed. We just finished affirmation today. I just had a conversation with a woman, and I was describing this to her. She was talking about how she had just started opening her mind to the whole LGBT issue. And she said to me, you're a sweet person to talk to. And I'm like, I've never heard that in my life. But I do know that I have become more caring about people, far more empathetic, far more sympathetic, far more willing to reach out and help and touch someone. Or I was just dead. Not dead. I was subdued. The emotions weren't there. And they just spring forth now. Especially love and caring for other people. Better caring for my family. So the changes in me have been dramatic in that area. But for me, those are just good things that happened. I'm more concerned about, so I reach out and try to help those other people who don't have what I had. Because I look back and my journey seems to have been so simple Actually, I told my current psychologist I had to go talk to her to get on hormone therapy, etc. So I chat with her every once in a while. And I said, it's like I'm living in a fairy tale. And she looked at me and she said, now? And I said, yeah, you're right. There were some rough times. There were times when I didn't feel like I could be who I was, and I was hiding things and I didn't like it. I got lucky and I wasn't suicidal or depressed or those things. But overall, it was pretty, when I compare it to other people's journeys, it was just seems like it was so simple. And since I've come out and since I fully transitioned socially, my life has been just wonderful. And so sometimes I have survivor's guilt. I'm like, how can my life be so great when people around, one of my best friends in St. Louis can't find work right now? And because she's overqualified for everything she tries to get, she's transgender and she's in her 50s. So she's too old, overqualified, and LGBTQ.
She has three things.
Yes. And two or three of those every time seems to get her. And she's still looking for for an opportunity. And she's a woman who, if she was in her original profession, she would be easily making six figures in a good job. But she can't find work right now. And it's killing her. So I'm like with her, supporting her as much as I can. She's just okay financially, and she just went through a divorce, and so there's just things that in her life that I'm like, I didn't have to deal with these. Some of them were easily taken away from me. So my wife, I recorded things with my wife for quite some time. Well, she passed away in 2016. And that was one of the bargains that I'd made. I will not fully transition until we're not together. We were married for 34 years. And it was shortly after that I decided that from now on, right after that, I told my kids and I said, from now on, weekends are Valerie time, no matter what. And then I decided to be more culturally aware. So I went and bought tickets to all these different venues, and every time I went out to do something cultural, it was as Valerie. And then I was sitting at one of those one night. It was an open air theater, huge amphitheater. We're waiting for the show to start. And I'm just sitting there, actually dressed very much like this, looking around, and I thought, this is absolutely right. And that was the point that I decided that sometime very soon, I wasn't sure when, full transition was going to occur.
Valerie had found Valerie.
Yes, very much so.
I want to break this part of the interview down into those three categories. That transition on a familial level with your wife and children.
Okay.
The transition into society, friends and outside family, and church.
Okay.
So let's talk about each of those categories and how maybe the first opportunity that each of those groups saw you, how you reacted, and then their reaction as well.
Okay. So we're going to talk about wife first and how I eventually came out to the therapist. She was working with me and my wife, and one of the things she was after me was to get away from the logical side. I'm an analyst, and I have a very analytical mind, and I have a very analytical personality, or did. It's become much more soft and open now. And so she said, we need to find out who you are, not what you do. Because normally when you talk to someone, you go, hey, what do you do? And you tell them what your job is and what are your hobbies, and they tell you what things you like to do. But she said, I need to know who you are. And because I can wield weapons as words, and I'm very likely to wield them to get what I want, never meanly, but in a very stubborn and pointed way, she said, you can't write something for me, at least not just in normal prose. You need to draw a picture, write a poem, make a movie, do something, write a song, figure out how to play an instrument, and you have like 2 weeks to do it. I'm like, oh, geesh. And so, okay, all right, fine, so I'll do this. So I get in the car after the session, I've been thinking about it, and go driving around a little while, and I thought, what am I going to do? and thinking how this is so stupid. What am I going to do? And then suddenly it just hit me. I'm like, oh, crap. I know exactly what I have to do. I have to tell her that I'm a crossdresser. That's what I had in my head at the time. Maybe I told her transgender. I don't know, or whatever the word would have been in my vocabulary at that time. So I went to Kmart and I bought this ugly dress and a couple of other things, and I bought some makeup I didn't know how to use, and took it all home. And I was working out of town at the time, so I hid it all away and packed it up and went out of town for the week again. And that week I took a video camera and I made videotape of myself just talking into this camera and explaining my history, growing up with women, strong female roles, what did it mean to me, how I felt when I was a kid. In fact, I need to go find that tape because I haven't seen it in so long. It was in 97. So I took that to her and I said, here we go. I have a VCR with our next session. And so she plugs it in, and she's a member of the church. So this is kind of like the first church member I've ever told as well. And so we sit and we watch it, and she says, thank you for sharing that for me. And now we have to figure out your style. Total acceptance, and like, well, of course this is the way you are. Like she already knew it or something. I'm like, yeah, you didn't know that. But it was like, okay, this is who you are. This is finally coming out who you are. So,
but we have to pick a better fabric next time.
Oh yeah. It was some ugly stuff. So, and I did a little fashion show just to show some things because it was ridiculous. But I did it anyway. But that was the videotape. And so the rest of that session and our next session was, because I knew at that point, the next thing I have to do is tell my wife. Because I can't get this out here and then not be part of my marital experience. So we were working on that. And at the time I was executive secretary in the ward. And so I'm sitting a week later on a Sunday in bishopric meeting. And I get a phone call from my wife, which you normally wouldn't get from her. She is irate, distressed. She had been looking for something in one of the office area that we shared, and she found these clothes that I purchased. And she was certain that I was having an affair and some woman had been in our house. And so she was frantic, and I was like, no, everything, it's nothing like what you think it is. I promise you it's not an affair. When I'll don't get the kids ready, don't come to church. When I get out of bishopric meeting, I'll come home, we'll talk about this. So I get home and I get this and I tell her, I've got this videotape. I tell her what I've been talking about with our therapist, who was a woman who went by Jo. And I said, this is what's going on. And of course she was like, I can't believe you're making up a story like that to cover up an affair. I said, no, I promise this is it. So we called the therapist that afternoon. Fortunately, she's also very a good friend at that point. We've been seeing her for a little while. And I said, this is what's going on. And she said, let's meet right now. And so we all got our car, and she got in her car. We met halfway, and we sit in the parking lot of a mall with a portable VCR, and we let my wife watch this tape that I'd made for the therapist. So she got to process that now. This was not what we expected. Our intent was to tell her just a week later. But she found it, so it was a shock to her. We went through a lot of things at that point. We didn't know what to do. She was quite upset, as you would expect. But in the long run, it became more of a trust issue. As now there's the whole trust issue within a family. It's like, you didn't tell me this. And my only response to that is, I really didn't know. It really isn't something that I wanted to be a part of my life. It's something that I kept waiting to disappear from my life. I kept hoping it would disappear from my life, but it didn't. And so it had to come to this. So this is now part of my life, and I'm sorry that this is the way that you found out, and I'm sorry that you didn't know before we got married. I'm sorry that I've dressed in your clothes, including your wedding dress when you weren't around. I'm sorry that all those things happened. And I thought she would leave, but she didn't, which was both good and bad. Good because the marriage stayed together. Bad because it was part of her pathology. She was borderline personality disorder. And so everything in her life was done to her. And so she said, I have to accept this because you're my husband. As opposed to, and I said, no, you really don't. You have to acknowledge it, but you don't have to accept it. And I wanted her to see if she could come to that on her own rather than feeling it was forced on her. It never really happened. So she was on and off over the years, okay with some things that would happen. One time I went somewhere without telling her. I was supposed to tell her every time I went somewhere, so she knew what was going on. I went somewhere one time without telling her because she was working overnight as a nurse. And she got called off that night, and she came home before I got back home. And that was a disaster. Because I came back home dressed after having gone to visit some friends. And so that was not good. So that just broke the trust, any trust that we built at that point. So anyway, so we negotiated at that point. We had to figure out what could be done, what couldn't be done. We had some bumpy roads. I made mistakes. She made mistakes, and it was like almost any marriage. You screw things up, and then you try to put them back together. But we did stay together, with the understanding that I would go no further than cross-dressing occasionally, and usually not even around where we lived. I had to go somewhere else to do it.
And in your private time, kind of delineated or spaced out opportunities that you were able to do that.
And it was almost really, I would usually change at home and leave, but I never just hung around the house, even dressed, because we had so many kids. And we decided not to tell the kids until they were older. We did, and mostly because we didn't want them to have to keep a secret about their parents. We wanted them to have a normal childhood. We didn't want them to be ostracized or anything because their parent was one of those people. Mm-hmm. But my biggest concern was I didn't want them to have to keep a secret that they shouldn't be required to keep. So we decided not to tell them at that point. And we really didn't tell them. I told my oldest son when he was in his 30s. At the same time, my youngest daughter, who was supposed to be asleep, but was pretending to be asleep, she overheard me talking to him. She found out. She called her mom the next day, and she goes, "Mom, I think I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear." And so Robin, my wife, called me, and she goes, "Rebecca knows." Well, there's only one thing that Rebecca could know, so I had to go talk to Rebecca. Fortunately, Rebecca is my most ultra-liberal child. And so I said, "Here's what's going on." And she was like, "Oh, okay, that's fine." So that was no problem. I didn't tell the other kids. And I said, "No, please don't talk to other kids. You weren't supposed to know. You found out." Jordan, my oldest son, he knows because I chose to tell him for specific reasons. But don't tell the other kids. And we didn't tell the other kids, at least I didn't, until after my wife died.
So church and society, where do they come into the...
So church and society. Church, of course, knew nothing about it until society. Well, they kind of intertwine. So they started an employee resource group at my employer, in place of employment, for LGBT and allies, called Proud and Allied. And they announced they were forming this, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not going down there. I don't want anybody to know. And then one of the organizers contacted me. One of the things that happened right after my wife passed away, 2 months later, I finally went and got my ears pierced. And so I was wearing these silver studs, and I wore them all the time. Oddly, right after my wife passed away, I was also asked to be the Sunday school teacher for the youth. So the day after I got my ears pierced, the counselors came to my house and asked me to be the Sunday school teacher. So I'm sitting there looking at them and going, okay, can you not see these?
And they're like, well, there's not two on each side, so yeah, I guess we're safe.
I don't think they even noticed. And I was wearing my nails longer at that point, but I was using a neutral color polish. So I thought, okay, sure, I'll do that. And so they'd done that. So at the time I was now wearing longer nails and wearing this neutral polish. So the person at work had noticed that. So she kind of sent me a question, would you like to come to this? And I was like, where did that, I knew what had happened, I knew what they'd seen. She goes, I didn't want to offend you, but I thought maybe you might be interested. I'm like, yeah, I guess I should go. This is time to at least go down there and pretend to be an ally, right? So I go down and I'm talking to them, and we have this discussion. The national headquarters sent someone out. We're the U.S. headquarters, and the international headquarters is somewhere else. They'd come there to organize the group. And so we talked about what the company believed in, diversity. We trust. We want all these things. It's built into our HR policies, protecting gender expression and gender identity. And so I thought, I might be able to actually transition here at work. I never thought that would have happened. There'd actually been another thing a couple of years before that was about diversity, which surprised the heck out of me when I went to that. But I'm sitting in that meeting and I'm thinking this could be happening. So we go around after the organizational meeting and they say, let's everybody tell why you're here. I'm like, oh, all right, it got to me. And I said, well, I'm here because I'm transgender but not socially transitioned. And I don't know if that'll ever happen. I'm like, okay, I've just now told people at my office that I'm transgender. So that was a scary moment. And meeting ended and we sat around and talked and ate pizza and stuff. And so I went back to my desk, and the organizer who'd come from international headquarters come wandering over to my desk. Can I talk to you for a minute? He said. I'm like, sure, I guess. So we go sit in one of the little privacy booths that we have around the office, and he said to me, are you not transitioning because of work? Because I want you to know that it's perfectly safe to transition at this place of employment. And I said, well, that's not the biggest reason. I've got church and family I've got to deal with. But yes, I'm transgender. Yes, if you need someone to talk to somebody, let me know. At the time, I was and still am the secretary of the St. Louis Gender Foundation. So I'm already working with other people, cross-dressers through fully transitioned transgender people in every phase possible. So I'm already working with those people. And I said, but this is who I am. This is what I do outside of work. If anybody else in the company ever has a question, they can come talk to me. It's perfectly fine. You can give them my name and information. Because I decided that if I'm going to be out to any level, I need to be out as much as I can be to whatever comfort level I reached at that point. So yeah, I will let people know. So that happened. And then a few months later was the thing where I was at the theater and I thought this is going to happen. So that's when I went back into the office and I went to HR and I said, on January 1, 2019, I will be fully socially transitioning. And they got to work. They said, okay, you're our first. And she goes, we've got guidelines. I have to go find them. And so she went and found them, and they actually used the transition guidelines that are produced by Out and Equal, which has a full list of guidelines for what should happen in a company for transitioning transgender people. And she goes, and she hands me their document. And she goes, basically, this is ours. We're going to do this. We're going to have training classes for your immediate work group. We're going to have some other training classes for the optional training classes for the company at large. And we're going to make this all happen.
Did it make you feel like a pioneer in your workplace, or did it make you feel like a project?
It made me just feel grateful. Neither of those happened. She brought me the stuff, and she goes, turns out you're number 2. There was actually someone in California in the company who had already transitioned, and she didn't realize it at the time. But when she went and talked, they go, oh yeah, we've had another one. So I didn't feel like a pioneer, although sometimes I think maybe that is, because I'm the most visible member of the LGBT community in my office of 600 people, and I've worked there for over 25 years. 19 as an employee and another, around that, and then another 5 previously as a contractor. And so I liked there and respected there. And so that's part of the reason why I have to be completely open with everyone, because I'm transitioning in place. So at work, they said, you can do it. I got to HR. They said, we're going to make this happen. Everything that I want, I didn't have to ask for anything. Everything that I would want was just said, here, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be in female spaces. Your names will be changed. You come in January 1st, new badges, new name. We'll fix everything. Great, thank you. So that was pretty exciting. Along with that, at the same time, I went and talked to my bishop. And so I said, hey, new bishop, because he was just recently called. And I'd known him for quite some time.
And these are always, if you know bishops well enough, it seems like the ones who are just called into a calling, sometimes the biggest bombshells just drop on them.
You don't, I'm assuming he hasn't had a bigger one.
These poor bishops.
Yeah. So I walk into his room, and we sit down because I'd asked for the interview, and he didn't know what the heck was going on. So we said a little prayer, and I said, okay, here's the deal. I am transgender. I am socially transitioning fully on January 1. And I only want to know if I will still be welcome at church. That's my only question for you. He, of course, had questions like, what is this? Are you gay? Well, I wasn't before now, but apparently now I'm a lesbian. So I said, no, I'm still attracted. He goes, how did this work with your wife? And I said, my wife's known for 20 years. And I loved my wife. That's how it worked with my wife. I loved my wife. I loved my kids. We were raising a family, and I just had this. And so now I'm getting rid of this facade. I'm now the same person you always knew, but I'm no longer hiding behind this masculinity thing.
This is like the coming out experience for many LGB members of the community, where they're not just coming out for the world to accept them, but they're inviting people in to get to know them better.
Very much true. That was what was happening with me.
Yeah.
And that was my strategy. Really was like, this is what's happening. Will you accept me here? And I just need to know.
You're controlling the message. You're inviting them in on your terms.
That was part of it. I tend to do that. So he had questions. He said, what is it, transgender? What does transitioning mean? He asked about chastity. And I said, well, I was married for 34 years. I got married when I was 18. I'm done with that kind of a relationship. I am going to be blissfully, quietly single for quite some time. And if I ever do get another relationship, it would be with a woman. It would probably be because she initiated it. I have no plans for any other relationship along those lines ever again. And then he asked about family, and I told him what my family's been told. And he basically went down the list, and he goes, well, I'm not seeing any problems here. So, yes, pornography, no pornography issues. Chastity, no chastity issues.
Sounds like a really similar to a Temple Recommend interview.
Kind of like it, yeah. And he was wanting to know those types of things, and so I'm like, okay. He's like, okay, I don't know. And he said, I am going to talk to the stake president. I said, well, there's a shock. So and the stake president, I wound up talking to him about a month later. And he did not know it, but I found him hilarious. Because we walk in, he's very respectful, which, kind of surprised me. Very respectful. First of all, what should I call you? And I said, well, I was still dressed as a guy. I said, if I'm dressed like this, you can call me Virgil. If I'm dressed as a female, you can call me Valerie. And he said, okay. And through the rest of the interview, every time he accidentally said Brother Greene, he would go, oh, I'm sorry, I meant Virgil. He took it so literally. And I said, no, he's trying hard. And I said, no, that's not what we're talking about. I'm just saying use the appropriate gendered stuff. But, he walked through the same questions the bishop had. But then he brought the news that he had restrictions he was going to give to me. Every one of which I was already fully aware was going to happen.
And these restrictions were placed because you were transitioning?
Because, in fact, yes, he said, if this is going to be happening because you're transitioning, these will be the restrictions. And they were the basics you normally expect. You can't hold a calling, you can't speak in sacrament meeting, you can't be voice for a group in a prayer. It's everything just this side of disfellowshipment. He did not ask for my temple recommend. they did not ask me to stop taking the sacrament. So it's just this side. So I just can't be a voice for a group. And then the bathroom issue, I have to have a bathroom cleared out before I use it. None of these things bothered me. I thought, who wants to give a talk? Who wants to have the bishop call you and give you a calling? These things are all, I'm fine with all of these things. And I'm going to be here regardless of what's going on anyway. And then he asked about third hour at the time. We had still had third hour. And I said, well, I prefer to be able to attend Relief Society. And so the only thing we had that I didn't like was they said, as long as I'm presenting female, then I cannot attend either priesthood or Relief Society. And disappointing, but fully expected. And my plan is to, okay, that's what I expected. You didn't do anything I didn't expect, and I'm not going to fight you with you about it, because I'm just going to do everything that I can within your guidelines to maintain myself. And I said, look, my faith did not change one iota because of transition. And really the only thing that's changing here is how you see me. And therefore, you're placing restrictions on me. So I said, when are these restrictions start? And he said, well, I guess it depends on how you appear. And at the time, I was wearing the earring studs, and I had longer nails. And he looked at me and he goes, well, I see earrings. And that's not a problem. Okay. And I see nails, and I said, well, between the two of those, I guess we should start now. And I said, well, then I guess I should transition at church now. So I said, when I leave, I'll go talk to my bishop, let him know, because I want him to inform the ward council so that they have some idea of what's going on. And that's as far as it goes, for sort of how far he was concerned. And once they knew, and then 2 weeks later, I show up like this. And that's been interesting. I have been, for the most part, fully accepted by my ward. I've had one, maybe two. I'm not sure if there's a second one because it was so inconsequential that I don't even remember it. I've had one person contact me by message book and say that I can either accept your new name, I can call you Valerie, but you will always be Brother Greene to me. So my reply to that person was, I really can't control how you address me, but perhaps it would just be better if we were on a first name basis from now on. And that's my entire response to them. That's the worst thing that's happened to me at church. Everything else has been great. I've had sisters come over and talk to me. I learned later that members of the church were debating this within their families. I had a sister who I'd known for a long time. I give her tennis balls because I play a lot of tennis, and she uses them for her horses in various ways. So I called her. I said, "Do you want tennis balls?" And this was actually Martin Luther King Day. This is 6 months after I had transitioned to church, and she goes, "Yes. Are you home?" "Yeah, I'm at home." "Can I come get them right now?" I said, "Sure. Come on over." "Do you have time for some questions?" "Absolutely." And when I had come out on Facebook originally, I had put a short message. In fact, my coming out photo remains there. It's going to stay up there as my background from now on, with the message that I posted up there. But at the end of it, I said, if you have any questions, ask them. And I've had so many people contact me and ask her questions. But she asked her questions. She told me about the fight she had had with her husband as they tried to figure out, was this true? She talked about how when she first saw it, she didn't believe it. She was going through denial. Then she was mad at me. She was like, how could this person I'd known for so long force some little kid to have to ask their mom, why is that man in a dress? And then she went through, she did denial, she went through anger. Then she said, and she and her husband had multiple conversations, and it was causing a rift in their family. I'm like, I can't believe this. And she said one day she sits down with her husband, and they finally decided that they just had to decide that the old me had died and there was a new me here. And I've heard stories about parents just having funerals for their child that they lost because they think they've just lost them. But when I talked to her, it was more of that's how they processed through it. So I told her, I said, you realize you're talking about the stages of grief. Okay. And she said, yeah, I know, and that's what we had to do. So, church has been really good for the most part. The first day I was there, all the leaders came up to me and told me they supported me and asked what they could do. One of the counselors, who I picture him as just this staunch TBM, truer than true kind of Mormon, walks up and tells me how brave he thinks I am. So, with these minor restrictions, I can live with it. So I don't go to certain meetings, but I'm welcomed at almost everything. I have great interactions. A little girl sat next to me a few weeks ago, and she was drawing something, and I looked over and I told her it was a cute drawing, and she said, "Thank you." And later that day, she was at the end of the meetings, and I'm standing around after Sunday school in the gymnasium, and this little girl shows up in the door, and she walks right up to me, and she goes, "I can't find my daddy. Can you help me?" And I thought, the children just trust you as an adult. They trust you as a person. They don't judge. I thought, well, everybody in this ward knows me, so I took her little hand and we went looking for her father. Nobody freaked out. Little things like that happen. A Relief Society president sat down and told me that one of the young women she'd had for years, who doesn't come to church anymore, had called her to have lunch with her. And she said she'd like to come back to church, but she doesn't feel comfortable at church because she doesn't like to wear dresses. She wants to wear pants. And she said, the president told her two things. She goes, first of all, if you want to come, you tell me and I'll wear pants too. And second, and then she said that she told her about me. I'm very public. I have to be open because I have 5 children and 6 grandchildren. That family's going to be there forever. I transitioned at place at work where I've been working for more than 20 years. I transitioned in place at church where I've been there for more than 25 years. I'm not going to hide anything. There's nothing to hide for me. So just be as open and frank as you can possibly be. So she told her, she said, if Sister Greene can come to church, you can come to church. And one of the things that I decided, I've had some really good online discussions, and one of the things I said at one point was, I intend to be there, even if eventually I get excommunicated. I was told by the stake president, he goes, these are the restrictions, and because of the positions you've held, there might be others. That was almost a year ago, and I haven't heard anything about it. Because at that point, I had been high priest group leader, I'd been elders quorum president, and various things, executive secretary. And I guess those were high enough for them to consider
Those are all
visible.
Those are all stake callings.
Yeah, and I was a stake auditor at the time as well. So I had been for several years. After having had been a ward clerk for many years, I've done all of these things. And so he said there could be other things, but I've already decided that even if I were excommunicated, I'm still going to show up every week. If I can't take the sacrament, that's fine, but my faith, again, hasn't changed. And the people in the ward have welcomed me. And if there's anybody that doesn't like it, I haven't heard about it. The bishop did say some people had gone and asked him what was going on, and he said, this is what's happening. But no one's come to complain to him about anything. And so I consider myself to be what I call a beacon of diversity in an otherwise homogeneous congregation. So they need me to be visible, and so I am.
I like that. Let's have a candid discussion to the newbie to this topic.
Okay.
Those who are listening to this podcast saying, I want to understand this topic better.
Sure.
I want to understand transgender people better.
Yeah.
What is your advice to them? How do they start? Where do they start?
Where do they start? There's so much information on the web for them to look at. Out and Equal has stuff that talks about their transition guideline, talks about what transgender means. There are so many organizations if you just look up the word transgender, what does it mean, you'll find credible stuff on the web. And I don't know what most of those are. I know the Out and Equal we've used. There's an organization within Missouri called Promo, and they're the politically activist group that works on legislation within the state of Missouri. And there are several others that don't come to mind at the moment. But there's plenty of stuff out there to explain what Transgender 101 is. But for someone who's looking for information, transgender is just someone who fully feels that they are in the wrong body. In fact, we were discussing what this means from a church perspective, and someone brought up Proclamation on the Family. And I like to remind them that one of the things in the Proclamation on the Family says that your gender was established in the premortal world. And I remind them, in the premortal world, we had no bodies. We were spirit only. And there's nothing that I can see that guarantees that when I got put on earth, that I was put into the correct body. And I fully believe that that's what's happened to me. And I think transgender people are just trying to be who they are in a scary, scary world.
It's not kind and favorable.
It is very often not kind. Again, my experience has been so, what I consider to be idyllic, based on what I've seen other people. I go anywhere I want. I've never been accosted in public by anyone, other than being catcalled a few times while walking around in Chicago. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know why you did that, but okay, thanks, but creepy. So you get to learn new things about stuff from a women's perspective. That's quite interesting.
That's a great point too.
Yeah,
you're a very valid point.
And I don't know. I can't tell you about the female to male transition. I know people, but even as much as I should understand it, I still think, why on earth would you want to do that? You're already a girl. You're already the best. So, and I fully understand intellectually I understand what's going on, but just emotionally I was like, you already were there. But I also know that that's because they probably think I was already there. You were already a guy. No, I wasn't. And a transgender person is simply trying to be who they are without being forced to be someone they're not by society.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, great definition.
Thanks.
And it leads right back into that topic we discussed earlier about authenticity.
Yes.
Just being true.
Yes.
To who you
and the stake president talked to my son in his last Temple Recommend interview. And he said, so how's it going with your dad? And I've told my kids that I am still your dad and your grandpa. The term mother and grandmother stays with your mother. You can call me whatever you want, but I would prefer that I'm still grandpa and dad and father. And so my son says, and he posted some beautiful stuff right after I did that coming out that he didn't warn me about. And so I just didn't cry about it for a long time because it was beautiful. As he described, the face of courage, as he put it. I couldn't have been more touched. But he did that. So he's talking to the stake president. The stake president asks him how it was going. And he goes, well, I supported him and I thought it might be more difficult. But he said, once I've seen how happy she is, I can't do anything but believe it's right. And the stake president said, yeah, it's not what we thought it would be. And I'm like, well, what did you think it was going to be? I think they expected a fight. I think they expected me to demand to go to Relief Society. They expected me to do something, to demand rights or things or the fixed stuff. But I just walked in and decided, look, I'm going to, it's not the right phrase, but I'm going to play your game. I'm going to, this is where I know I need to be. And it's your institution. And I tell people that all the time. I said, you have to do two things. You have to separate gospel from institution, and you have to separate policy from doctrine.
Yeah.
In every case, you expect the institution and the policy to be influenced and directed by the others, but I just think that's not always the case. And so I have to show up. I have to be who I am. And if the policy says and the institution says these are the restrictions, I'm like, fine. But I'm still going to be here and you're still going to see me. It's not because I'm trying to stick my thumb in your nose or anything like that, or your thumb in your eye. It's because it needs to be seen. And so that's what I'm going to do.
What is your advice, as we kind of round the corner to the last part of the podcast, what is your advice to a person listening to this podcast who identifies as trans, who has not yet transitioned, not yet spoken out, but recognizes and understands I'm different?
First is to realize that you are absolutely loved by your Heavenly Father. And if you feel that you are less of a person, is simply not true. Another discussion I was having the other night is we have to give people an opportunity to demonstrate that they love us. So often we're afraid to come out to people, and I fully acknowledge that there are some times it could be dangerous to come out. But you have to give them the chance to love you. And if you don't tell them what's happening, you never know if that's going to happen. And I know some terrible things have happened, and I'm hesitant to say just go do it. But feel things out and find out whether you can feel safe. But if you at all think that you can feel safe doing that, you've got to tell other people. Just to let them, otherwise they can't help you. And there is so much help. It doesn't have to be your family. It may be that you go search out a support group. It may be something like affirmation. You come to an affirmation conference. It may be, people have been prodding me to go to North Star, and I don't know anything about it much, but maybe that's where you need to be. Maybe there's a local thing you can do. I was talking to a woman, and she turned to me and she started talking to me, and she said, I want to apologize for my past fears and my past attitudes. She has a gay son, and she said, I am going back to talk to my bishop and my stake president. We need to make a safe space for LGBT members.
And that didn't happen because someone was rah, or beating up the church or advocating for something.
Right.
They just learned that from an experience, meeting someone similar.
They were here. Well, it was her son. She wanted her son to come sing at church. She's like, well, can my son come sing at church? She asked her bishop. And he's like, well, sure. Now, there's an issue with the church because the church has a stance of sorts on LGB. They're kind of silent on T, so we're kind of hanging around.
The most alienated and misunderstood group in the spectrum, in my opinion. Yeah. In terms of Mormonism and transgenderism, completely alienated.
I would agree.
And misunderstood.
Yeah.
And I don't get it. And if I can do anything with this podcast, I want to share more trans stories.
Great.
Because I want the people to know how wonderful and beautiful. I mean, just you describing your son's reaction is a testament that you and your wife were incredible parents.
Thanks.
And did the right thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. There is a story to be told in all of these experiences.
Sure.
And the evidence of that, the fruits of that, are people like your son, a bishop, a stake president who gets it. A
little girl who asked you to help her find her dad.
Yeah.
There are just so many things that are going so well. I put stuff on Facebook, and half of my likes and loves are from people in the ward, and I'm putting stuff out there like being in the LGBT tennis tournament in St. Louis, and this person I got paired with, we won it, and they're like, oh, this is great, And so I put things out there that church members would not normally see, but they're still there. We love this. We like you. They're not ignoring it.
For those who say, how do I build a bridge? That's it.
That's how you build a bridge.
Those are ways to start building bridges between the LGBT and LDS communities.
Yeah, and that's what I do. When I got banned from the third hour, I call it my banned from the third hour, I decided to go home instead, and what I do each week instead is I write down make little notes from a sacrament meeting, and I write on Facebook a thing about what I learned that day. And I've had sisters contact me. We weren't in church today because we were in California, but I looked up to see what you had written today because I want to know what you wrote. It's not always LGBT specific, and usually it's not. It's just my perspective on what I learned that day and how I think it should be discussed. It's kind of like my private sacrament talk that now I'm doing more often than I wanted to. But it's a bridge because look, now Valerie's doing it. My Facebook account, I changed my name and I changed my picture. My entire history's still there. They still know me as the person that I was, and they now know me as the person that I am. So that bridge gets built throughout the ward. And oddly, it's mostly the women who are doing it because they've welcomed me into the fold as much as they're allowed to within the institution.
Yeah, I love those Missouri women.
Yeah. So,
anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to touch on?
I don't know that there is. We just want to make certain that people know that they can be loved, they can find support. I've talked to many people late into the night that they can contact me. I'm Valerie Nicole Green on Facebook. I'm Valerie_Rising on Instagram. They can contact me on Messenger. I've had lots of interesting conversations. And that's what I want to do. And I don't want to stay up every night till 3 a.m. like I have some nights. But,
well, then you don't want this job.
Yeah, yeah. So, but whatever I can do to help, especially if it's a one-on-one, a person just needs someone to talk to, contact me. Join one of the groups. There's some closed groups for active transgender LDS members, LDS or LDS affiliate. Maybe they're no longer members, but they're there to love you, and they're there to help you as much as they can.
Yeah, these are people who have removed the boulders out of the path.
Yes.
That have gone before you, that have helped to make that path a little smoother.
Yeah.
And I fully understand that they're there to help.
Yeah.
I've seen that in a number of groups.
And you use the term. I don't consider myself a pioneer, but I try to be just a light that you can look towards and see that there's something you can do. My life's been fairy tale like, but there is some hope. You can transition. You can live a perfectly normal life. With luck, your family will go with you. With luck, your ward will go with you. Your work may go with you. Those things have been fantastic for me. I want them that way for everyone. They may not get that, and I understand that, but there's also support to help them in other ways.
And I think another great point to bring up is now you've heard another story of a trans person.
Yes.
They're not all the same.
Oh, definitely not.
And your experience has been fairy tale like.
Yes.
Not all experiences are not fairy tale like, but this has been your experience.
Yes.
And I appreciate that aspect of it.
You're welcome.
That you were willing to share it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for giving us some time to share your candid and personal experience. And I think it has the ability to help lots of people.
I hope so.
I think you're a great person.
Thank you.
Wonderful. It's been another great episode on the Latter Gay Stories podcast. We thank you for joining us on this episode. As Valerie talked about, if you have questions, feel free to comment below and also send her some messages and get in touch to better understand this topic. Very open, very honest, and very candid about a topic that each of us can do better at understanding. The Latter Gay Stories podcast is your opportunity to understand the intersection of sexuality and reality, where it meets at LDS Street and LGBTQ Avenue. It's podcasts like this that help us each continue writing our Latter Gay story.